Hello everyone, welcome to Mistakes Were Made. If this is the first time you are seeing our channel, we created this to document our progress with debt reduction and eventual elimination. And if you've been following our channel for a little while, welcome back. This is going to be a video that I have been looking forward to making for a little while now and have had multiple suggestions to do. We are going to do a look back on the last year of our progress. This is our 1-year anniversary of creating the channel, as well as getting started in this whole debt situation. So, our debt reduction situation. So, if you haven't seen the first video that we made, we did our debt confession video in October of 2023. I'm not going to get into the details of all of the background about the company and where, the whys and hows and all of that. But essentially, the company that I work for at the end of July laid off nearly their entire workforce. So roughly around 30,000 people, minus the few that they kept on board to help go through the bankruptcy process. Yes, they also then a week later filed for bankruptcy. My area is in the finance and revenue side of things, and so we were incredibly lucky that our team stayed relatively intact and retained their jobs. However, I would be very willing to bet that all of those folks who lost their jobs, well, I better not say all, but a large portion of those people who lost their jobs probably were not in a position to sustain a change like that. They probably were not prepared. I know this just from talking to the people, that were on my team at the time, friends who were in other departments, things that I've read in various, message boards for, where fellow employees have congregated. And of course, I look at our own situation. We were not at all prepared for the loss of my job, the income that my job provides going away. And frankly, we both made very good money, and we spent it like like there was no tomorrow. We really were not thinking about the future. We did not do a lot in the way of saving. We didn't think about that rainy day that might come. And so this situation caught us completely off guard. And if you have seen our first video, you can hear the concern in my voice. That's probably one of the most commented things where people have looked at the original video or had watched it previously and compare it to the videos now about how this journey and where we are today has really changed just the tone of my voice. So it was, and it continues to be scary. I don't want to make anybody think that we are like 1,000% confident and no, this is no big deal or anything like that, because that's not the case. But let's go back to that point in time. So when we first found out, we had kind of actually put our heads in the ground a little bit, because my situation didn't really change a lot. There was still work I needed to do, and we were still doing it on a day-to-day basis. Obviously, the loss of numerous friends and coworkers was difficult. But if we're looking at it from just the job front side of things, I was still doing the same stuff I was doing before. I was still getting paid. I still was employed. So initially, you had the shock, but we didn't really change anything because we weren't really sure how to absorb this new change. So that first month in August was just kind of a blur. In September, started to do some research, definitely was watching a lot of videos on YouTube, and we started to get a rudimentary idea of what we needed to do. And bottom line was we needed to get a handle on our finances. We needed to know how much money do we have coming in every month? How much money is going out every month? And maybe even more importantly, where the heck is that money going to? So we looked through our finances, got all of that information, wrote it down as best as possible. And then we needed to kind of assess, okay, we have X amount coming in. We have X amount going out. How much of that is absolutely required? How much of that is the mortgage? How much of that is car insurance and food costs and things like that, things that we absolutely need? How much of that are things that we don't need but we want? How many things are things that we don't need but are wants, but we don't necessarily need to keep them in place in order to continue moving forward? There were a lot of things that we needed to assess. And of course, the very first step was making a budget. And so gathering all that data together was what allowed us to put our very, very, very rudimentary first budget together. And essentially we figured out what are all of our debts, what are all of our recurring costs that need to remain, that we need to be paying for. What are all the things that we may not need, but feel that they are important to keep in place. Understanding, as we started to get a little bit more sophisticated, that anything we keep in place that's not a requirement is certainly going to impact our ability to meet whatever goals and priorities we put in place. What are the things that we can let go? And, figuring those out. So we did that. Additionally, we decided to create kind of what are the initial stages of what are now our cash envelopes. They were very, very, elementary at the time. They weren't robust. And similarly, the recurring costs that we came up with at the very beginning, they were not as expansive as they needed to be. There were certainly things that we missed when we were first getting stuff together, but the bottom line was we did make a budget. We did look at the finances, and we did the best that we could in that first month in October. So what did that look like? Okay. We are gonna do this right here. And I think I'll zoom in just a little bit. So the first piece were our debts. What were our debts in that first month? Well, we had the loan with my mom, of which we still had roughly $3,000. We were paying $250 each month towards. We had our mortgage, which was at $243,828.54. The minimum payment, the mortgage payment, was $1,672.34 at the time. We had our Discover card, which the balance was $10,506.30. And I want to say in October, the minimum payment was $376. U.S. Bank, we had a balance of $8,965.45. Minimum payment was $283. Bank of America, the balance was $12,160 with a minimum payment of $125. Citibank was $7,725 with a minimum of $80. And Amazon was at $5,133.07, and the minimum payment on that was $175. Now, one thing to keep in mind is as we kind of fleshed out our budget, we did make adjustments to things and ended up in a place where we were paying a little bit more than the minimum. And I want to say like some of these may reflect a little bit those minimums changing, being a little bit more than the minimum. It was a year ago, and my ability to document stuff was not quite as robust as it is now. But basically, all of that added together came to a total of $291,317.36 with a minimum payment of $2,961.34. So that there may have been a little bit of wiggle room here, like with this $77, it might have been, or $7,700, that might have actually been $77 and it was rounded up. But for the most part, this is how much we were needing to lay out every month at minimum. Now, the non-mortgage debt, part of that debt was $47,488.82, or a total of $1,289. If you have been following my channel for a while, you know that once we got our budget kind of settled out, we determined that we were putting $1,225 towards debt just as a particular line item. So that covered anything for the non-mortgage. The mortgage, of course, is its own line. So I want to say we came to that after this got paid down just a little bit, or we may have even these may include some extra payments in them, and we may have adjusted that down slightly just because of what we learned from our processes of research. You need to be making minimum payments and then putting extra towards your debt when you have it, things like that. The other piece, for the monthly costs, after we'd gone and looked through everything, we determined them to be $1,330. Again, this was very early, very rudimentary. We were not capturing every cost that we had, but that was our first initial steps. Same thing with the extra costs, which again, these eventually turned into our cash envelopes. We determined there were $1,275. This morphed as well over time, and so this amount has changed as well. Now, I did go in, I looked to see what our income was in September of 2023 to get an idea of what we were looking at as we went into October. And we had two paychecks from Mr. M for $1,400 each, or a total of $2,800. And then the remainder is what my pay came to. One of those paychecks did have incentive pay on there, so a total of $6,840. So if we look at this and we're looking at our minimum here, that's roughly about 45% or so of our income coming in. The overall cost, and I did bring my handy dandy calculator, of $2961.30. Oh, what did I just do? $2961.34 plus $1330 plus $1275 gives us a total of $5566. So roughly $5,600 is what the budget was. So even at that time, the amount, if we're looking at just the minimums, et cetera, that we determined for the budget, we still had some extra money to work with that could go to debt, etc. Now, one of the main things that constantly came up was you need to have an emergency fund, and that needs to be $1,000. And so that was one of the first goals that we tried to and were successful in meeting. We did have money in our account. It wasn't that we were spending so much that the well was dry, and so that's why we were using credit cards all the time. No, we were just lazy. We were just stupid. We used credit when we didn't need to. We used credit when we shouldn't. But we did have money in the account, and we're able to put together our emergency fund in that first month. So in the grand scheme of things, if you're looking at, different milestones and wins that you can look to that helps motivate you and keeps you going. The first one was figuring out what our finances actually were, because we really didn't have any idea of just how much we were spending and on what we were spending it. So getting that data and understanding what it meant, and then putting together a budget. Those two things I would say were our very first, goals met. Then second was the emergency fund that we were able to put together, $1,000.39. Now that said, at the time, we had no job loss savings. We did know what to expect once my job went away. So if it was going to actually go away in November, with the PTO that I had at the time, and the pay I had at the time, we were calculating $2,247 for a PTO payout and $3,794 for the payout for severance, which was a total of $6,041 that we could expect as far as our baseline amount for if the job went away. So what does that get us? Especially, we can add our $1,000 here, so $7,041. Well, we still have our 55 here, so if we had, $5,600 and Mr. M's paychecks, two at $1,400 a piece, or $2,800 were covered, that means there was another $2,800 that my pay needed to cover. So if we go and we look at 6041, do I have cents on there? I don't. Plus 1,000 and divide that by 2,800, we roughly had 2.5 months worth of coverage that we could presumably rely on. That's how long we had of what we could expect to come in and what we had saved to be able to still maintain the budget we had. And unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room here because these were basically minimums. There might have been a few dollars that we could throw off of this, but not much. The biggest one that there's potential for adjusting would have been the mom loan. Oops, you guys can't see that. Would have been the mom loan of $250 because that was between us and my mom. And I'm certain that she knew the situation. She would have been fine if we had to temporarily reduce what we were paying to $50 a month or something like that. But yeah, we did not have really any opportunities with how the budget was set currently to really adjust things more in our favor. Now, it's possible that I could have found a job in 2.5 months, and hopefully that amount, the job that I find, would cover the $2,800 that my pay needs to cover at minimum. But then that again would still mean that we're not making very significant payments towards our debt. And we're just barely kind of scraping by at that point, which, it is what it is. If that's the situation that we ended up being in, that's where we would have been. But at least at this point, we needed to figure out kind of what are our priorities going to be. The first, of course, was we did determine $1,225 of our budget that we are still kind of in the process of making is going to go towards debt. Now, a lot of the videos that we were watching were very specifically talking about bringing debt down and things like that. Understandable. But the fact of the matter is there's no guarantee that I'm going to find a job in 2.5 months. There's no guarantee that I'm going to be able to find a job that will help us sustain the costs that we have incurred and we need to pay. So for us, our focus ended up being, we need to bulk this savings up. We don't know how long my job is going to last. It could just be this month, this October, and they give us the word that you're out in November. But if the job is going to continue on, then instead of focusing on bringing debt down, we need to bulk up a safety net. And so once we made that decision, the question was, well, how much of a safety net do we need? The thought was, okay, 6 months seems reasonable. Granted, we were very naive. We hadn't even really looked at the job market. So 6 months seemed fine. So now we know that my share of the budget is $2,800. Multiply that by 6. That gives us our first goal that we need to achieve. Okay. So then the question is, I'm going to back out just a little bit here. How do we get to that goal? And if the debt reduction piece had been part of it, had been where our focus was, that too would be, how do we get to that goal? Now, first off, we do have some money left over at the end of the month if we're sticking to the budget that we put together. So that's the first step. The first step was, we need to change our habits and how we spend, how we look at money, how we determine if something is important. We need to figure out what our priorities are. And very importantly, we need to stop using the credit cards at all. So for us, the not using the credit cards was not nearly as difficult as changing our spending habits. We did have a few oopsies where things that we purchased did go on the credit card, but that was because the mechanism in which we purchased them was linked to a credit card instead of to our checking account. So it was just a case of, well, pay that off immediately and then make sure you change the payment method to our checking account. But getting out of a habit of a 10-year habit of just, buying things when you want to buy things, spending money without a whole lot of thought, that was where we were most concerned. And that is one of the reasons why we created this channel, to help keep ourselves, accountable. We also created within our rudimentary cash envelopes, things like our entertainment fund or dining out fund or groceries, areas where we knew that spending, our spending habits were kind of lax and we hadn't in the past paid a lot of attention to. And really for us, it was a whole lot of cold turkey work within the budget that we have created. Yes, mistakes might happen, and because it's really easy to be out and about and be like, oh, let's just pop into 7-Eleven and grab some sodas and a candy bar, or a snack or something, and not have our cash envelopes with us, or spend money there instead of preparing ahead of time and using snacks and things that we have at home, or just foregoing it all together because we don't really need it. It took a little bit of time for us to get the hang of being mindful and deliberate about our spending. We did have a few oopsies here and there, but I'll be honest, because of how scary the situation that we were looking at coming up was, I think that was probably our biggest motivator to keeping us on track. I sincerely believe that if this was more of a, we just decided to go down this route, I don't know that we would have stuck as closely to the guidelines and limitations that we had put in place as we have, because we know a job is going to be going away and we don't want to put ourselves in a position where we end up losing our house or, some other dire situation. So once we had an idea of what we needed to save our money for, there were multiple milestones that we met or decisions that we made to help us get there more easily. So the first one started, right around the same time we started the channel. In October, this I didn't have a whole lot of say over. Everybody who was remaining at the company got a 5% raise. I do believe that they gave that raise as kind of an incentive to keep people on board, because even though we were in bankruptcy, even though they laid off nearly the entire company, there was still work that needed to be done. And people who were familiar with the company, familiar with the job, familiar with the customers, the rules, and everything like that, were going to be able to do those jobs more effectively and more efficiently than somebody coming in blind and not really having experience with this particular area, this kind of work, et cetera, et cetera. So they wanted to keep people in place as best as they could, and I'm pretty sure that's why we all got that raise. So that right there increased the take-home pay. Mr. M made the decision to reduce the amount of money that he put towards his 401k. So he reduced the percentage going to 401k. That increased his take-home pay. He also made the decision to change how his pay gets allocated. So in these numbers, we do not have Mr. M's car payment or his credit card. We touched on it very, very briefly during our debt confession, but the main focus was the items that come out of our shared checking account. He was fully covering and dealing with those other two items with the pay that he had that comes into his checking account. So the way it was set up before was $1,400 of his paycheck every pay period would come into our shared account, and then what was left of his paycheck would go into his checking account. He changed it to kind of go the other direction. He determined, okay, I've got this car payment and I have the payment towards the credit card, so I need X amount of dollars plus a little bit for, just incidental money. And so that amount, divide it by 2, that's what I'm going to get every month, and then everything else will go into the shared checking account. And so that means the take home for him ended up going up. It's also why things are a little bit more variable than they were in the past. I also made the decision to completely eliminate my payments towards the 401k, to my 401k. So that increased my take-home pay. Now, at the time, I was thinking, well, we're probably not going to be here, much longer than the rest of this year. It's October of 2023. Probably by the end of December, we're going to be done. So a few months of me not contributing to this for a job that's going to go away, not a big deal. So that's what I did. Little did I know. Though, even with hindsight, I would have still done the same thing. So that increased the pay. That helped, because the more we increase our take-home pay and the more we stay with the budget that we created, the more that we push back on our habit of, impulse spending and things like that, the more money we have each pay period at the end after we have paid those things that we must pay, and thus have money that can go towards the savings cushion. So the next milestone was probably, it came in at the beginning of 2024. This one, again, didn't have a ton of impact on us, though in November is when we made our allocations. At the time, it was unsure whether we were going to be working in 2024, but just in case, we had to sign up for healthcare again. Well, because we were now a much smaller company as far as number of employees, they had to renegotiate stuff, and the company made the decision that they were going to pay for our insurance completely. Prior to that, or for 2023, I was paying out premiums for healthcare. That's not unusual. I was also paying out a little bit each pay period for my HSA. Well, for this new round, I made the decision to not fund my HSA any longer. I have money in there, so I was like, you know what? I can't imagine that it's going to last much longer after 2020, going into the new year. So no sense in putting extra money. And plus, with the company taking on the cost of the premiums, less money was coming out of my paycheck. So that change went into effect in January. The next item that was kind of a boost, it wasn't necessarily a boost to the take-home pay piece of things, but it was a interim boost while we were focusing on the job loss savings towards the debt piece. Now, as I've mentioned, 1225 is what, when we created our budget, is how much we were allocating to do for debt payment. So that, once we had gotten to that point, we were looking at paying incremental amounts more than the actual minimum payment for the various credit cards, but it all stayed within $1,225. In January, we made the decision to take our two highest interest cards, the US Bank card and the Amazon card, and bundle those together in a 0% promo. Now, we couldn't do the entirety of the balance at the time. These balances they were lower than this because we're now looking at January of 2024. But what we were approved for the Reflect card, and that's why you hadn't seen that on here before, because it didn't exist in October 2023. We paid the entirety of the Amazon card and then most of the US Bank card. We did just subsequently, we were able to pay the remaining balance as part of our standard debt payment process in January. So we were no longer worrying about US Bank and Amazon as separate entities. They were now the Reflect card plus the balance transfer fee. Why that step was so significant is, if you look here, we've got our thing, $283 plus $175. At minimum, we were paying $458 for these two cards. Now, in reality, and again, 283 is not quite accurate because it was lower than, it slowly lowered over as we were paying stuff off. In reality, we were paying $500 to them both. We were paying $225 for Amazon, and we were paying $275 for US Bank. So $500 at the time. When we made the balance transfer to the Reflect card, the minimum payment, because it was a 0% and based on the amounts that we transferred over, was $137. So if you even look at just the minimums, looking at these numbers, 283, 175 being 450 plus, dropping down to 137, that's a huge change. The decision we made was for the Reflect card, since we were taking two cards and putting it into one, was we were going to pay $175 on there. So if you take 175 from the 500 that had previously been applied, we now have created $325 of breathing room or of flexibility in the debt realm, debt repayment realm. We're still going to spend all of this. We just have the luxury of changing where it's going to be spent because we have now changed the scenario or changed the situation by doing that balance transfer. So then the question was, well, where is this going to go? Many people would say, hey, we should be pushing the Discover card because that was our other card that had interest. And hindsight from where we are now, potentially we might have made that decision. But at the time, our main focus was, okay, we have no idea when this job is going to go away. And we now have, after creating the reflect card, 3 cards that have the benefit of no interest, but they all have a deadline. And the Bank of America card had the deadline that was going to expire the soonest. So to us, it made most sense for us to be focusing any extra opportunities on Bank of America. We created that within our budget already of $325, so we put that $325 on the Bank of America card, boosting its minimum payment from $125 to $450. Okay. Now, keep in mind, we're still not focusing on debt right now. We're still building up our job loss savings, but because we made this decision, we have made a situation where we can continue to push debt reduction on the debt we have, and also accelerate the payback process on the card that we want to make our focus. Okay. So that was in January. Now in February, we hit the milestone of meeting the goal for the job loss savings. Every month or every pay period, if there was extra money at the end of the pay period, that went to the job loss savings. In the first pay period of February, we hit that goal. So then going into the second pay period of February, the idea was, great, we are now going to shift our focus, and any extra money at the end of the month, or pay period, I keep saying that wrong, is going to now go towards debt. Many people suggested, hey, and then, so thank you folks over there in YouTube land, said you might want to keep at least a little bit going to savings. And that made absolute sense because, 6 months it feels or felt generous, but you can never save too much. So that is where the 75%, 25% process was born. 75% of any leftover money at the end of a pay period was going to now go to debt. 25% was going to continue to push and bump up the cushion for the job loss savings. So that second pay period in February was the first opportunity that we had to do that 75% of debt and put it towards Bank of America. The next milestone that we met, and I think that this is probably where things really got a huge push, was March. And it's twofold. It was a magic month for Mr. M, and we got our tax refund. Now, looking at the tax refund, it was the largest tax refund that we have ever received, and we are not married, so we do not do joint filing, but we do obviously pool our monies. But so between us two, we had never seen a refund come to the total that this one did. And the reason it was so high is because there was a particularly high surplus in the Oregon budget. And so that triggered a mechanism called the kicker, which essentially refunds the surplus back to the taxpayers via the taxes. Or, when you're doing your taxes. I don't know all of the details or how everything all works. I'm not going to go into it, but suffice to say, it was the largest, if I'm not mistaken, the largest kicker that we've had in Oregon history. For us, that ended up being $7,861 and probably some cents. And so that led us to kind of a turning point, because that's a lot of money that's not budgeted, that we're not expecting to have. And thus, technically, it's not assigned to anything, and we could use it for anything. And we had the discussion, what do we want to do with this money? We've got a ton of things around the house that need to get handled and that need, and some of them need a good chunk of money. So we could pay for one, two, three, a few things. We've got plenty of cash envelopes that we could fully fund, so that we're very, as prepared as we think we need to be for certain situations. We obviously have debt that we could be putting money to, savings that we could be putting money to. We could take some of that money and just go and do something fun, have a little mini vacation. To this point, we've been at this for a good, 4 months. So doing something a little bit extravagant to celebrate wouldn't be outside the realm of believability or acceptability. And we watched a few videos of other people talking about what they're doing their tax refund, and there were a lot of people who were funding things that they wouldn't normally have the funds to do, like vacations and things like that with their tax refund. So, there were a lot of things we thought about. But at the end of the day, we decided we really, really want to get this debt down. And we didn't feel comfortable letting this opportunity pass us to make big impacts on our debt. And I think going through that process and coming to that realization of just how important the end goal is to us was really eye-opening for us, because again, this was free money. Again, obviously it's not free, those are just words, but we had the flexibility and the ability to do just about anything we wanted to with this money. And in the end, we said, you know what, this is the most important. So we put $6,000 towards the Bank of America card. We put $750 towards the mom loan, and then we put like $11 to Discover. So this is not the first time that we're putting teeny amounts of money towards Discover, little increment amounts. So what did that do for us? Well, first of all, obviously, it took a big chunk out of Bank of America. It also paid off the mom loan. That $750 was the last amount that we needed to pay. We paid $1,000 towards the job loss savings, so that got a nice boost as well. And then last but not least, our last non-debt option was we did put $100 to our long-term saving goal. That was our focus at the time, which was getting the recliner for Mr. M. And, it would have been nice to do something more vacation-y and fun at the time. But in talking with Mr. M, I don't think either one of us regrets the decisions that we made. Because in between the actions we took there and the fact that this was a magic month, the mom loan was paid off at the beginning of the pay period, I believe. I could be wrong. It could be that we still had one more payment. No, because I think that $750 cleared it up. So during the first pay period of March. And then because we had, what was left over at the end of the pay period in March and in September, we were doing the 75-25, plus the fact that it was a magic month, we had enough money that was allocated to go towards debt to pay the rest of the Bank of America card off. So in 1 month, we were able to clear 2 debts. And what did that do for us? That meant the $450 that we were paying towards Bank of America plus the $250 that we were paying towards the mom loan had now opened up within that $1,225 debt line item that we had in our budget. So then the next step was, well, where are we going to allocate that? We're going to follow the same process we did before, find the next balance transfer account that was going to expire the soonest and focus on that. And that was the city. Again, looking back at from where we are today back to the decisions made then, this would have been another opportunity to maybe focus on the Discover, which again probably would have been a good choice to make as well, but not knowing when the job was going to go away, we still went with the city and with the balance transfers being our main focus, even though this was not going to expire until mid 2025. And that's why I say, looking back now at where we are today, we probably could have gotten the Discover card out the door sooner. But, we made the decisions we made based on our concern because we had no idea how long the job was going to last. So now we've got $700. The amount we were paying every month to city was $100. So we were now able to, and had now started to, put $800 a month towards the city card. In April, Mr. M received a raise, a 15% raise. So again, we are now boosting our take-home pay, which means if we're sticking to the budget, if we are being conscientious about our spending, it means we are now having just that little bit more at the end of each pay period that can be divvied up 75-25 between debt and savings. In May, unexpectedly, I received a promotion from supervisor to manager, and with that came a 15% raise as well. So take-home pay for me increased, and thus at the end of each pay period, the extra allocated, unallocated amounts increased to be able to be split between debt and savings. Now, there's kind of a double win with that increase for me, because it wasn't just my take-home pay was increasing and we were actively able to pay more towards debt and our savings cushion, but also the PTO and severance are being impacted, because we are now going to, when we do the calculations, we are now calculating how many hours times a particular pay rate at a higher pay rate to find out what our dollars are going to be for the PTO and for the severance. So, that was a double win. It kind of had a double impact on our situation. So that was May. I believe it was in June that we were able to pay off the city card, which then meant we were snowballing that $800 to go towards the next main goal, which was the Reflect card, which we had just opened up in January. At that time, we were paying $175 towards it. So the total going to the Reflect card now was $975. We actually bumped that up by $1 so that it could be divided in two more easily. So it was $976. This entire time, we've still been paying, at this point, $250 towards Discover. That was more than the minimum and stuff like that. But the main focus was Reflect. And as you guys know, in September, we were able to pay the Reflect card off, which is just crazy days amazing. But, none of this would have been possible if we didn't have the basis, the base of a budget in place, the wherewithal to stick to that budget, changing our spending habits so that we don't go outside of the budget, and understanding how it affects our ability to reach our goals if we do. And our pay. I mean, I'm not going to, pretend that the fact that we both have good pay isn't incredibly instrumental in our ability to have been able to pay these things off so quickly. Yes, we changed our spending habits, and that was huge, because if you have extra pay and it just fritters away through your fingers every month, it's almost as if you don't have extra pay or, you know, a high income or anything like that. But the income piece of this has been incredibly important, just as important as us sticking to the budget that we created. So now we're here today. We are here in October of 2024. So what do those numbers look like? The mortgage is now at 200. Oh, nope. Before we do that, let's zoom in. Let's see. Let me make this a little bit easier to see. The mortgage is at $237,258.45. Now, our mortgage has increased. It is now at $1,735.11. We pay $1,750 each month. So we're not going crazy overboard with extra payments. It's $15 roughly every month more. The Discover card is at $8,513.69 at the time of us, you know, putting this all together, and it has a minimum payment of $187. Now you can see we've only dropped that down by roughly $2,000, and a big chunk of that was done at, you know, when we paid off the Reflect and we still had money left over. So this entire year, the fact that we were paying interest has had a huge impact on how quickly that debt has come down. Basically not quickly as at all, but 8513. Our total debt right now, please ignore the smearing, is $245,772.14. Minimum payments, $1,922.11. Look at how small this list is compared to this one. How crazy is that? There really aren't words. Just looking at the difference between here, not even looking at the numbers, but the fact that there are two focuses here versus our focus having to be on so many different things is amazing. The non-mortgage debt is 8513. You know, it's the same as our Discover. That's what's left for our shared credit card situation here. The overall debt reduction, again, please ignore the smearing, is $45,545.22. So that's including mortgage and all, you know, reduction of what we see here. For the non-mortgage reduction, we have reduced our credit card and loan debt by $38,975.13. Can you believe that? Almost $39,000 in the course of a year. And keep in mind that this is actually, we didn't actually start really pushing on the debt until March, end of February, beginning of March. So to me, this number is so amazing. It's two sides of a coin. On the one hand, I look at this $38,975 and I think, what could we have done with that money? What could we could have gotten a new roof. We could have gotten the patio, that extension that we wanted to do in our backyard. We probably could have gotten all of the windows that we wanted to change out so that they'd be more energy efficient done. We could have put a ton of money towards retirement. There's so many could haves that this amount right here reflects, that it could be depressing. But How awesome is it though? Yeah, we couldn't have done those. We could have done those things and weren't able to, but we cleared $38,975 worth of debt. I these numbers, these numbers represent to me our ability, if we really put our minds to it, to achieve pretty much anything, especially if we're working against bad habits that we have. And I know a lot of times you think to yourself, if something bad were to happen or if we needed to change things up, yeah, sure, we could do that. But you don't really know until you have to do it. And so to me, this tells me, honestly, we have no excuses going into the future. We have seen that we can be patient. We have seen that we can wait and build money up. We have seen that we can make good financial decisions and go against maybe not our instinct, but our wants and our needs to determine what is important. That is what this number means to me, beyond the fact that, oh my gosh, we have weights that have now been lifted off our shoulders. It's more of what we can do if we have to. And yes, our backs were kind of against the wall because we had this unknown date looming on when everything was going to fall apart, but we still did it. So before I go too far or get myself all verklempt, I'm going to move on. So next, when we go and we compare, for our monthly costs right now, we are looking at $1,451 per month at the highest. And I say at the highest because we do have a cost that comes out every other month. So some months are lower, some months are higher. So $1,451. For the extra costs, or actually this should be CE for cash envelopes now, the most it's going to cost us in a month is $1,468. Again, we do have some months where they are higher than others, and that is because of the grocery cost. Just like we have a magic month for Mr. M, we also have a magic month for groceries because we look at how many Mondays are in a month to determine how many weeks we're paying for groceries. So some it's going to be 500, but more often it's the normal 400 for 4 weeks. Our income has dramatically increased from when we started. We are now at roughly 8560. I think I actually rounded this down when looking at the September numbers for paycheck income. I don't know why I did it. I just like zeros, I guess. So 8560 is what we had come in September of 2024. So that's when you look at this. This is a crazy thing too. If you remember before, it was like 45% of what our income was the cost for our minimum, as well as for what we determined we needed to pay every month. Well, now we have 19, 22, 11, even though we do not pay the minimums. We don't pay the minimums on this. 1451 plus 1468, total of 4841. If we look at what we actually pay, we take 1750 plus 1225, 1451 plus 1468. We're looking at $58.94, roughly $5,900. And that's basically the budget that we look at when we're trying to figure out, well, what is my share of the budget to be paid for? How much of what does my new job need to cover, et cetera, et cetera. If you take 8560 from that, that is a significant difference. That is what has allowed us to get to where we are now. Staying in our budget and the fact that our income has increased to the point that it has, that's it in a nutshell. Now, Emergency fund, that has not moved very much. It's only at $1276.11, and that's because we've only been putting $25 per month towards it. Our main focus for savings, of course, has been the job loss savings. Those are our two different buckets. So where are we with that? As of the time of creating this, we were at $15,488.12. This is money in the bank. This is in our hands and available for us if the job were to go away today without waiting on what the company is going to give us. This is where, when I was talking about this number up here, this is part of that too. This is the patience level. This is us putting money away. We know we can sit and wait on anything that we think is important and slowly build the money up to be able to pay for it. We do not need credit cards. If it's not a huge emergency that has to be paid immediately, if it's something that we just really want to do, we have the patience to save money up for that. And that it's good to know that we can do it. And that's what that represents. Now, as far as PTO and severance, based on the PTO that I had at the time, because up until the end of September, I have taken exactly 1.5 days. And I've been banking all that other PTO up, for that. Now, I say up until then because the first week of October, as many of you know, I did take off so that we could deal with the junk removal and stuff like that. So going forward, the numbers are going to be a little bit different in calculation than they would have if I hadn't taken that day off. But we are expecting $7,373 for PTO and $4,292 for the severance. Just like with these numbers, this is also kind of speculative because though I can do, 300 hours of PTO times the per hour that I earn at my job, I'm not super sure how much tax is going to come out for taxes, Social Security, all of that. So there could be some wiggle room here. I could be really, really low in how much I'm assessing for taxes, or I could be really, really high. Who knows? But altogether, that comes to $27,153.12, which is ridiculous, frankly. So now we have, $5,900 is the budget. Oops, you can't see that. The amount that we are calculating for Mr. M's pay is $1,875 per paycheck because we have seen his pay be as low, under $1,900 at least once. So just to be on the conservative side, that's what we figure. So you multiply that by 2, and that comes to $3,750, which means my pay needs to cover $2,150. If we take the $27,153.12 and let's be equal with the emergency fund, and add the $1,276 to that, divide that by $2,150, and we are looking at 13.2 months that we can sustain our budget without me having a job actively bringing money in. If we, stick to everything that we've had in place, don't have any unexpected emergencies or things like that. Now, what is the other benefit that we have created by getting to this point? We have created an enormous amount of flexibility. Where we talked before that we didn't really have there's not a lot we could do to reduce this required amount to come out of our budget. Before, here, we're paying $1,750 for, you can't see, $1,750 for the mortgage. We're paying $1,225 to go towards this card. But even if we ignore the mortgage part, we could reduce how much we're paying towards debt down to $800, $500, and still be making a significant impact. Now, yes, it does mean that that would slow the payment of this last credit card down. And so it would take longer, obviously, for us to get there because we're still going to be charged interest and things like that. But we have the flexibility in the budget now because we were able to get rid of all of this other stuff. So if we take our, 1451 plus 1468, and then we just look at, let's look at if we're able to actually get Discover paid off. That's what we'll look at. So we're not doing 1225 at all. We just have the 1750 for the mortgage. Now I need to do some, let me write that down. That's like 4,700. So now I'm adding 27,153, 12 plus our 1276, and 27,153, 12 plus 1276. Divide that by, oh, I know what I'm doing wrong. Excuse me. Take the 4,700. I forgot that we had to take Mr. M's payout. That leaves us with 950 that my pay needs to cover. And so now we can take 27,153, 12 plus 1276 and divide that by 950. I think I may have made a little bit of mistake because in my original one I got 30.7, but now I'm looking and I'm getting 29.92. But whether it's 30.7 months or 29.92 months, that is huge. That is absolutely huge. So if we get to a point where we're pushing that 12-month point and I haven't found a job that can sustain us, my share of our stuff, we can, slow down or how much we're paying towards debt and have a little bit more leeway. Obviously, we'd make that decision much sooner than getting to the actual 12-month part. And of course, none of these numbers include what we can expect for unemployment because I don't feel comfortable trying to figure out what that's going to look like. So there's still some background there too. So that's where we've put ourselves. With the success that we've had, the blessing that this job has lasted as long as it has, that is where we're at. We still have ways to go. We do still have the Discover card. We still don't know if I'm going to be working in November. I have a feeling that I am, but nothing official is there. So as we discussed in a previous video, everything has to fall exactly into place, and I need to work at least through November for us to have any shot of paying this off by the end of December. So hopefully we are going to be in that position where we are able to pay this off by the end of December. Whether we will be working in November, in December, into 2025, at this point, I don't know. As great as all as this is, and this is amazing, there is still that fear of being unemployed. There's still that fear of not having that guideline of a job, the fear of being out in the job market trying to find a new job. This is hugely, hugely comforting because not having to worry as heavily about how we're going to afford a piece of the income going away. I don't know that there's really words for how much that helps, but it doesn't eliminate the concern. It doesn't eliminate the fear of the situation coming up. But we are in much better position than we were before. So we are already in over an hour. I have a couple of things that I put together as I was putting this together, kind of keys to getting your situation figured out and starting your debt process. So the first one was figure out your income, the outgo, and the where to. This should be where to. You need to know exactly how much money you're bringing in. You need to know where the heck that money, how much of that is going out and where the heck it's going to. You need to be very honest with yourself about your spending. You need to be very honest with yourself about the quality of your spending. And what I mean by that is, are you spending money on things you really need to be spending money on? And if the answer is yes, then the answer is yes. I am not going to judge somebody about how they decide to spend their money if they have made a conscious decision that this is something that is important and I'm going to put it in my budget, and I'm going to understand that if I spend money on X, Y, and or Z, it is going to impact my ability to meet whatever goal it is I have put in place. Once you have all your details, create a workable budget from that information. And that's, again, where you need to be honest with yourself. You can create a budget that allows you to spend all your money on whatever it is you want it to be spent on. But if you have goals that you want to achieve and your budget is not in alignment with helping you achieve that, that's a problem. So you need to make sure that you're putting things in place that'll help you to get to where you need to go. And you may need to change your spending habits. This doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have to do it forever, but you might have to switch things up for a little bit, especially if there's, again, things that you want to achieve. I personally think you need to cut off credit card usage, 100%, if you can. Now, there's some people who they don't feel that they can. And honestly, I think that just is going to make the debt journey that much harder. If you're paying $500 a month towards your credit card, and depending on whether it has interest or not, you may only be getting the effect of $350 because, they're charging you $150 just in interest. And then you go and you use that credit card and spend another $200. At the end of the day, you've only put $150 towards that debt, or maybe even less, because you're putting money out, but then you're clawing it back by your spending habits and the use of the credit card. I am not somebody who thinks all credit card usage is bad. You need to be disciplined about it and make sure you're paying it off every single month. And if you can't do that, then I think that you shouldn't be using credit cards at all. But I do think there can be some benefits, points, gas benefits. Some people use stuff for air flights and stuff like that. Credit cards can have a positive to them, but you have to be able to use them wisely. Be smart about your usage and not have the credit card use you. So for me, the answer was just cut off credit card usage altogether. Once we have everything paid off and stuff like that, I'm not willing to say we will never use a credit card again. We might, but we will actually be in a position and be wiser so that if we do use the credit card, maybe we want to get the points for something, it will be paid off either almost immediately or before the end of the cycle so that we don't get charged interest. Find your priorities. For us, as we discussed, once we looked at where everything was and the situation we were in, we realized that our priority could not be the normal, let's bring our debt down. we instead needed to build a savings cushion because of where we were looking at for the future. Now, absolutely, if the job wasn't going away and we didn't have to worry about that, then the debt reduction would be our priority. And just because you have one priority when you start doesn't mean that that priority can't change. I think you need to be able to be flexible, and if something changes in your life, then you may need to veer off your current track and make a new priority and start focusing on that. That said, stay on track and celebrate all wins. I really think it's important to celebrate all wins, big and small. We celebrated creating a budget. We had never done a budget before. And that's like a very basic thing that you need to have for this process. But we celebrated doing that because it was something new. It was something we learned, a skill that we put together, something that we spent time on and very deliberately did. We celebrated the fact that we hit the emergency fund, even though we didn't actually have to do a lot of work to get to that because we had money available, but we assigned that money a job. It was now assigned emergency fund. That was a win. We hit a milestone. We celebrated the fact that we were discussing the debt. We were discussing our finances and making decisions together because we didn't really do a lot of that, especially in the more mundane things. That is a win. And of course, every time we brought down a debt to zero, that was a huge win and absolutely deserves to be celebrated. Be flexible and give grace, not excuses. So the be flexible, things are going to happen and you're going to need to make changes. You're going to need to adjust things as best as you can. Just because you have to change a track that you were going to something else does not mean you're a failure. It doesn't mean that you're doing stuff wrong or anything like that. You are just reassessing and moving yourself to the next best position. Now, I will say this: give grace, not excuses. That is something we had to learn to do for ourselves. There were a few times that, we've overspent, or especially in the beginning where we weren't thinking and we went and made purchases of things that we really didn't need. And so at that point, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, I can't believe, why did we do that? We understood that that was a dumb thing to do, and so we need to give ourselves grace. But if that kept on being a habit, at that point, we would be giving ourselves, making excuses because the behavior is not changing. And so you have to be really careful and, again, very honest with yourself. Are you really giving yourself grace for a mistake here and there, or are you excusing things and allowing yourself to continue to do a behavior that is not in alignment with the priorities that you have made? And the last main goal is live a little. I very, very much believe that you, and this kind of goes along with the celebrate all wins, need to give yourself some joy in this process. There needs to be some happiness, a light at the end of the tunnel. And if that is simply keeping a Netflix subscription or a Prime subscription, so you have a little bit of fun that you can go do, that's great. If that means you need to budget some money for entertainment so you can take yourself or you and your family can go out to eat, go to a movie or something like that, I very much believe you need to put those things into your budget. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to budget for it so that you can do it every single month. If that's what you want to do, I don't see anything wrong with it. But maybe because you want to be incredibly gung-ho about meeting the goal that you have in place, you want to save a little bit so that you can do something nice every 3 months. Maybe you want to save up and reward yourself because you have stuck to your budget. You have not gone and bought those purple boots that you saw, even though they were on sale. They were beautiful, and normally you would have just snatched them right up and didn't think about them, but you hesitate and you're like, you know what? If I buy this, I'm going to have to buy it on credit card, even though it's on sale. I'm not going to do that to myself because I have this goal I want to meet. But I can put $10 aside for a couple of months and hope that they're still on sale when I have the money. And then when it is, if you still want them, go pick them up. I think you need to have happiness in your pursuits where money is concerned. I know that there are a lot of folks out there that seem to have this mentality that if you are not suffering, then you're not trying hard enough. If you're not scraping by, eating rice and beans, driving the worst possible car out there that barely gets you where you need to go, and there's no joy whatsoever in your household, if you're not doing that, then you're not really serious about your debt reduction process. And I disagree with that 1,000,000%. Now, that said, if that's the route you want to take, hey, more power to you. I am not going to say don't do that if that's the route you want to go. Good for you if you can. But for me, I need a little luxury. I need a little bit of a fluffy donut under my booty while I'm trying to figure out what is going on. I need that little bit of comfort. I need that mac and cheese in my new diet because I can't just go on barley water and celery. So live a little. Now, the last one this actually came up while I was finishing putting everything together was this bonus one. Plan ahead where possible. I really do think the fact that I have created like a bajillion budgets depending on different pay scales, the fact that I have taken the budget that we're working with right now and put it all the way out to June of 2025 so far, I do actually need to push it out further now that we've gotten to where we are, has been helpful. Yes, if you're looking at things too far in the future, you can't know what's going to happen, but having at least a little bit of a baseline, I think, is useful. It gives you somewhere to start. And then if you get to that point and life has changed, you at least have a place to begin and make adjustments from to get it back on track to where reality is. The fact that I can go and say, well, here's what we know about our current budget and our current situation. So if I get a job that pays this is what wiggle room we have. If I get a job that pays this is what wiggle room we have, et cetera, et cetera. That gives me a better idea on it's not all terrible if I can't find a job that pays the exact same that I'm being paid now. We can work with these different options and still be in a good position. So I very much suggest not just planning for today and planning for tomorrow, but plan out next month, maybe a few months out, and if you can, maybe even a year, just so that you have an idea of where you might be in the future. So, all right, this is, I'm assuming, probably one of the longest videos that I've done. And I know not everybody loves them, but if you have stuck with me, whether it's by watching the entire thing or fast forwarding or jumping around, I appreciate you taking the time. There are a lot of things that pull on our attention, and the fact that you would stay and listen to me babble on about where we started, where we are, and what I've learned about that, I very much appreciate it. And I firmly believe that our success has a lot to do with the encouragement we've received on this channel, the advice, the suggestions, the feedback that we've received. It has been incredibly helpful. And so I want to thank you all. I hope you found something of interest from this video. And I hope that we will see you in the next one.